Suffolk County, Long Island, New York. A little way from the bustling main street, sitting quietly in a time-worn single-story house, lives an elderly woman who keeps mostly to herself. Her name is Margaret Young. She is 69 years old. For many long years, Margaret served as the head nurse at the local hospital, a leader and a caretaker for the whole nursing staff. Now, she gets by modestly on her Social Security. Her days are simple and calm. "I've spent my whole life living for other people," she says, her voice gentle and matter-of-fact. "I always thought that was just how things should be." Beneath her soft words runs a river of years, decades spent bearing the weight of sacrifice and loneliness so deep it's hard to give it a name. It was in the winter of 2001 when Margaret lost her husband, Alan, to a sudden stroke. From that day forward, her world changed in an instant. Before then, Margaret and Alan shared the work of raising their two sons, helping each other through the ordinary worries and everyday joys of family life. Every weekend, they made a ritual of grocery shopping together, and once a year, they would treat themselves to a drive upstate for a hot springs getaway. Just a small delight to look forward to. When Alan was gone, Margaret had to take on every role in the family, including being dad as well as mom. Their boys, Michael and David, were then in high school and college. Michael had just started at a university in Boston, and David was at school in Philadelphia. The reality of tuition payments and sending them money each month bore down on her along with everything else. "I can't afford to fall ill, not now. Protecting their future is my main job," she'd remind herself, even when her body ached from exhaustion. Some nights, she would force herself through another long shift on the ward, running on empty but unwilling to let her children down. Years passed. Her sons graduated, found jobs, and eventually had families of their own. Yet, Margaret's work was not finished. If anything, the unspoken responsibilities grew deeper, more complex. Whenever there was Christmas, Thanksgiving, or the 4th of July, the Young family would come home for a big gathering. But for Margaret, these holiday visits brought as much chaos as comfort. The house filled with voices and clatter. Her carefully ordered routines were toppled every time. She ran all over town stocking up the pantry, scrubbed every room, aired out bedding, and prepared plates high with roast turkey, green bean casserole, and her grandkids' favorite pumpkin pie. And every year, she opened her wallet time after time, paying for airfare, covering restaurant checks, picking out toys for the grandchildren, and slipping cash into little envelopes as holiday money. "That's just what parents do, right?" she would murmur to herself. "If I pay, maybe I can lighten their load, even just a little." Again and again, Margaret convinced herself. This was just how a mother should be. After taxes and deductions, Margaret's Social Security ran about $1,100 a month. It looked solid enough on paper, but by the time she covered the mortgage, utilities, medical copays, and the never-ending upkeep on the old house, almost nothing remained for herself. She was grateful, at least, for the small savings account she'd quietly built up over her life, about $7,000. Most of it had been put away before she married. But now, that nest egg had all but vanished. "I can't remember the last time I spent anything on myself," Margaret confided, wearing a small, wry smile. "Almost every penny went to my family. But I don't think I've ever once heard a thank you for it." She managed a laugh. But there was something in her eyes, something tender and sorrowful that could break your heart just to see. Where once the family get-togethers were something to cherish, now they had become events that left her drained, in body and spirit. One quiet evening, Margaret pulled an old notebook from her desk drawer. It was her household ledger, a journal she'd kept, meticulously recording every household expense for over 10 years. On one page, written in careful block letters, was a record of her most recent holiday spending. This year's Christmas expenses: groceries, approx. US $250 travel subsidies, US $120 grandkids holiday money, US $160 total, US $530. And below that, in her tightest handwriting, she had jotted, "I always told myself this was normal. But how much of myself am I allowed to give away before I forget who I am?" Margaret gazed at her words for a long time. The familiar pattern of bending, stretching, and never saying no had etched itself so deeply into her life that she barely noticed the toll it took, not just in her wallet, but in her heart as well. Now, with the children grown and busy with their own families, visits grew less frequent. Margaret sometimes sat in her kitchen in the winter twilight, listening for a phone that rarely rang, staring down at her old patterned tablecloth. She had begun to wonder where her own life had gone. Would anything be left if she stopped supporting everyone else? In the stillness of her house, with its creaking floors and view out to a snowy yard, Margaret slowly began to dream for herself. In the months that followed, she joined a book club at the local community center. She signed up for watercolor painting classes. Some Saturdays, she would treat herself to hot tea and a slice of pie at the diner on Main Street, a small joy just for her. Margaret began a new notebook she called her Restart Diary, where she recorded even the little victories, did a jigsaw puzzle, called my old friend Shirley, mended the garden gate, and, eventually, Margaret found she could forgive her family for what they had never noticed or understood. She forgave them, not for their sake, but for hers. Life grew quieter, but not empty. Margaret was learning to love her own company at last. She looked out at the winter birds pecking beneath the frozen azaleas and felt, maybe for the first time in decades, truly at peace. How long am I supposed to keep being the one who pays for everything? That question, simple as it was, marked the true beginning of a change. May slipped into early summer, and with it faded the laughter and noise of Margaret's family's annual visit. The house grew quiet again after her sons and grandchildren returned to their homes. Now only the soft tapping of dishwater and the gentle hum of the washing machine kept her company. As she did every morning, Margaret stood at the kitchen sink, rolling up her sleeves to tackle another day's chores. Washing, tidying, folding. The routine settled around her like an old, familiar sweater. Suddenly, the shrill ring of the phone broke the quiet. Margaret wiped her hands on her apron and checked the caller ID. It was Shirley Stevens, her dearest friend since her nursing days. Another strong-hearted woman who'd raised her child alone after losing her own husband far too young. "Hello?" Margaret answered, settling into the worn kitchen chair. "Margaret!" Shirley's voice trembled through the receiver, ragged and raw with tears. "Could you listen to me for a bit?" Margaret's heart tightened. "What is it, honey?" Shirley let out a breath. Then the words spilled out. The kids came back, just like every year. The house was full, grandkids running everywhere. So much noise I couldn't even hear myself think. I should be grateful, and I am, but when everyone leaves, I just feel so tired. Shirley's voice filled with a quiet ache. "To tell you the truth this time, I spent almost $800 just over these past few days," she confessed, her tone threaded with disbelief. "Covering their flights, the takeout, toys for the grandkids, all of it. No one offered to pay a dime. Not even a thank you. Not one." A heavy silence settled in. "Margaret, aren't you tired too?" Shirley pressed softly. "Isn't it strange? Since when did it become normals for moms to open their wallets for everything, like it's expected?" Margaret couldn't answer. Not really. She only gripped the phone tighter, her knuckles white against the plastic. "Am I just the same?" After hanging up, Margaret found herself drifting toward her old roll-top desk. From the bottom drawer, she pulled out her household ledger, sturdy and worn, the pages neat with years of penciled notes. The cover, faded now, was decorated with tiny painted violets. Each month, Margaret wrote down every cent earned, every bill paid, a habit from another era. That notebook was a map of her life, line by line. She flipped to the most recent pages and began to tally up this May's family visit. April 28, May 2 groceries, approx. US 210 restaurant meals, US 95 presents for the grandchildren, US 70 travel cost subsidies, US 150 total, US 50-25. Margaret stared at the total, stunned. What? Nearly half her monthly Social Security was gone in a handful of days. What on earth am I doing? She didn't regret the time spent together. Not at all. She cherished those hours, smiles, stories, silly bedtime rituals with her grandkids. But beneath the laughter, no one even hinted at easing her load or sharing the costs. No soft word. "Are you okay, Mom?" No quiet offer. "Can I help with the dishes?" No practical grown-up suggestion. "Let's split the check, okay?" Oath words had never come, not once. The more Margaret reflected, the clearer it became. All those hours on her feet in the kitchen, staying up late to comfort a fussy child or fold one more basket of towels. She had done it all, year after year, simply because it seemed normal, expected. Invisible, unspoken labor. Is this really what family's supposed to be? That night, Margaret reached for a brand new notebook. Nothing on the cover, just blank white pages. With careful hands, she opened to the first crisp sheet and wrote, "This is my uneasy feelings. Journal." And, right underneath, June 5th, "I have spent almost everything I have, making everyone else comfortable. But who is looking out for me?" A lifetime had passed filled with lists and ledgers that marked her care for others. Now, Margaret was beginning to make a new kind of record. A gentle, honest tally of her own unease. She pressed her palm to those words and let herself breathe, feeling the weight finally shift, just a little, toward herself. In the silence of her Long Island kitchen, with the world around her soft and green, Margaret resolved, however quietly, to place her own needs on the page at last. And as she did, the beginning of something different stirred in her heart. Why does no one ever say thank you, I wonder? How did it become so normal for the parents to pick up the bill every time? Did I let my boys get spoiled, raising them this way? Or, somewhere deep down, was I hoping to be needed, hoping to feel essential by doing it all? Margaret pressed her pen to the fresh page of her uneased journal. The words, raw, honest, a little shaky, bled through to the next line, as if her own thoughts were sinking into the soft paper. This, for Margaret Young, was the true beginning of her awakening. She knew the next family homecoming would come sooner or later. Of course it would. Holidays and summer breaks always brought them back eventually. But now, for the very first time, she wondered, how should I act? What do I want? The seed of a new question, tiny and trembling, took root inside her heart. Soon, the long August break rolled around. Every year, like clockwork, her sons and their families returned to Margaret's place for the week of summer vacation. This year was no different. Margaret rose before dawn. She cleaned out the fridge, checked her grocery list, counted out coupons, and then hustled to the supermarket in town, already crowded with other families. Gearing up for the holiday. Her arms, thin and knotted from years of work, strained under bags heavy with steaks, sweet corn, coleslaw, and all the rest. She could feel the weight in her wrists and shoulders as she drove home. By late morning, Margaret was bustling about the kitchen and chopping, thawing burger patties, kneading dough for her famous apple pie. With both ovens running and pots simmering on the stove, the kitchen grew hot and close. Beads of sweat gathered at her brow, and her pale sweater clung damply to her shoulders as the late summer sun sliced through the uncurtained window. By evening, the house hummed and echoed with life. Her grandkids chased each other up and down the hall, shrieking and giggling, flinging toys across the living room. Someone called from the other room, "Nana, Nana, look what I drew." "Mom, could you put some more burgers on the grill?" "Hey, after dinner, are we having ice cream?" No one in the room meant any harm. In fact, these were the little snapshots of family fun, the happy, ordinary messiness that proved you belonged. But right at the center of it all, always spinning, acting, and making it work, there was just one person, Margaret. She woke at 5, put in a load of laundry, packed sandwiches for the park trip. For lunch, she whipped up Texas-style barbecue to please Michael, her oldest son, because he said it was just like he'd had back in Dallas on business. As soon as lunch was cleared, it was time to start dinner prep, then handle dishes, then coax the youngest grandchild into the bath. It struck her as she paused by the back door with the evening cool on her face. When did I last take a real break? That night, After everyone else had spread out on sofas to watch a movie, Margaret sat apart by the window, rubbing at her aching feet. A pain patch pulled tight against her back. Her shoulders throbbed with an exhausted heaviness. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked lotion into her knuckles. How many years has this been? She thought, though she didn't dare whisper it aloud. She let out a shaky breath, one that no one else in the world would see, and reached as if to stand, pushing against pain. Just then, faint voices trickled in from the hallway. She caught the tail end of a conversation from the guest room. The voice of her daughter-in-law, Susan. "Don't worry. I'm sure Margaret will give us a little extra money before we leave. She always does. I mean, it's a help, isn't it?" Time seemed to freeze for Margaret. Again she heard it. That word, give. Spoken so comfortably, as if it was simply expected. A chill, sharper than the evening air, pricked through her. Not gratitude, not even a polite hesitation. Just, of course she'll give us money, like it was as common as coffee. Without a sound, Margaret retreated to her own little bedroom. She didn't even turn on the lamp. She just lay on her side, still as a shadow, staring at nothing, unable to rest. Over and over, as she closed her eyes, she could hear it echoing. "I'm sure Margaret will give us money again." It felt as if her whole existence was reduced to being a billfold or a caretaker, something useful, not beloved or precious. She whispered so softly, "What am I to them? Just an ATM? Is this what being family means?" She pressed her face into the pillow and let the thought scorch its way through her chest. Next morning, as the sun barely dusted the grass outside, Margaret was already up. She found herself sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the family wall calendar. Today was the last day. The send-off. She'd have to scramble to pack up leftovers, fix breakfast, and, yes, prepare the little gift of spending money for each child and grandchild. It had all become routine. Not just for them, but, she realized, for her as well. She'd accepted it, never questioned it year after year. But now, a new awareness glimmered in Margaret's tired heart. The day would pass, the house would grow quiet again. But she could not, and would not let herself be invisible or indispensable, or taken for granted, forever. Because for the very first time, she was allowing herself to ask, "What do I need?" And, in a voice as quiet as dawn, "Don't I deserve something too?" But that day was different. Margaret's hand hovered in her wallet, fingers pausing on the plain white envelope she always prepared before the family left. It was an old, ingrained habit for years. She'd slipped extra money to her boys and their kids at the end of each holiday. That little help became another silent ritual, rarely even needing to be asked. Is this really what I should do? After all these years, am I still allowed to call myself a good mother? That silent question rang through her, clearer and deeper than ever. It struck a part of her heart that had grown heavy, slow, maybe even numb. Quietly, but absolutely, Margaret felt something shift inside. A new kind of determination, soft but unyielding, settling in her chest. "I'm just tired." The words, whispered so small, didn't reach a soul in that noisy house. But deep within, they echoed, strong and true. It was the last day of their summer break. These past few days, Margaret's house had been full. Her sons, their wives, and all the grandkids were bustling under her old roof, heading out later that afternoon to the Amtrak platform for their trains back to Boston, Philadelphia, and beyond. From early morning, Margaret did what she always did, prepping the farewell lunch, making the most of every leftover in her fridge, crafting chicken salad, corn on the cob, her special applesauce, and a light, just sweet enough fruit cobbler for dessert. She seasoned every dish as carefully as ever, tasting and adjusting, hoping for just one warm, "This is delicious, Mom," at the table. But this day, right after lunch, as if it had been rehearsed, Michael, her eldest, cleared his throat and spoke, voice almost too soft. "Yeah, Mom, I need to ask a favor. Could you help me out? My car's transmission went out last week, and it's costing so much to fix. Could you maybe lend me $1,400, just until I get paid?" The words hung in the room, thick as syrup, Everyone froze. In his hand, Michael already held out his phone, fingers poised on his bank app. A slip of paper? His account number was tucked underneath. He'd come prepared, as if the answer was already decided. Margaret didn't answer right away. She took a slow breath, closed her eyes, and offered a gentle, almost apologetic smile. I have just about 1,470 left in my checking account, she said softly, looking down. Someone, Susan maybe, or one of the children, let out a sharp, surprised breath. If I give you 1,400, Margaret continued, her voice even but sad, then what do you suppose I'm meant to eat? How am I supposed to live? For the rest of this month? Her voice never grew rough. No edge of anger, only a deep, patient sadness drawn tight between each word. She let her hands rest palm down on the worn table. For 20 years, Michael, I've never, not even once, said no to your requests. But today, I will. It's time I speak plainly because I have to. I'm just tired now. You could hear the old wall clock ticking in the sudden quiet that swallowed the entire living room. No one looked up. No one had the right words. Coming home for the holidays? It's not meant to be a free-for-all, not a way to take advantage of someone you love. I wonder, when did Mom's house start turning into a no-strings hotel for everybody? Margaret rose from her place, moving slowly, and settled herself back in her old spot by the bay window. She cradled her tea in both hands, breathing in the faint scent of Earl Grey. Michael, eyes on his knees, offered no reply. His wife, Susan, said nothing, twisting her wedding ring nervously. The children, tired from so much running and playing, drooped in their chairs, ignorant of the currents of worry and memory swirling around them. Margaret took a sip of tea, letting the warmth settle in her throat. I suppose some may think I'm a bad mother now, she thought. Maybe they'll be disappointed. But if I stay quiet, things will never change. I have to take responsibility for my own life, at last. Saying it out loud brought no magic relief. Her heart still hurt, a dull, warm ache spreading through her chest. But the words stood between her and her family now, a line she'd drawn gently, though firmly. Still, Margaret knew this was her moment. She would remember this as the day her life began to turn. Later, as they made their way down the cracked sidewalk toward the train station, the quiet hung between them, uneasy and awkward. In years past, someone would laugh, say, "Let's do this again," or, "Thanks so much." "Mom," or, "It was really great to see everyone." Today, none of that came. No bright farewells passed between them. The silence stretched, thin and strange. Margaret let it be. Sometimes, claiming your place in the world means accepting that the air will change, that those you love may not understand. Sometimes, it means trusting, at long last, that your boundaries matter as much as your love. Margaret walked home alone, the late summer light golden across her porch. Maybe she would sit a while with her tea, or maybe pull out her notebook and write her heart's own truth. At last, at the train platform, Margaret's youngest granddaughter was the only one to turn and wave goodbye. That small hand, waving through the crowd, was the only comfort Margaret carried with her on the walk home, the only bit of warmth on a day that felt so very cold. Back at her quiet house, Margaret hung her apron carefully on its hook. She pressed it flat with steady hands, folding it just so, as she always did. Letting out a long, slow breath, she murmured softly into the hush. I'm glad I finally said it. For the first time, Margaret could honestly feel it, deep in her chest, relief, tinged with a faint pride. She had spoken up at last. That night, for the first time in what felt like ages, she brewed herself a good pot of tea, just for herself. She put on a little music, the kind she used to love, and settled gently onto her old living room sofa. There, surrounded by the sleepy tick of the clock and the faint clink of her cup, Margaret let herself be tired. It was a peaceful kind of tiredness. For once, she had time to gaze kindly at the past and quietly toward whatever was to come. Ever since that summer, calls and messages from her family had grown scarce. At first they were short texts, an occasional "How are you?" or "The kids caught colds." Even those, soon enough, shrank to just smiley face stickers or hearts. Then, gradually, only the read receipts showed they'd even opened her notes. Eventually, silence. That spring, as cherry trees in the neighborhood bloomed pink and wild, Margaret paused one morning by her refrigerator calendar. She noticed the square marked Family Week last year. Her son's big visit had filled it, right after Easter. Staring at it, she said quietly, "Maybe no one will be coming home this year after all." But as she spoke, there was no sharp hurt in her voice, no echo of bitterness or longing. Her face seemed, if anything, calm. Perhaps even bright, as if something light had finally stirred inside her. So instead, Margaret's days slowly opened up. She began filling her calendar with time just for herself. Twice a month, she walked over to the local rec center's self-appreciation group for seniors. She smiled and joined the circle, listening and laughing, standing up each time it was her turn to share what she liked about herself. "This me isn't so bad," Margaret would say. The woman who carried her whole family through, year after year, she did just fine. It was the first time Margaret truly learned what it was to praise herself. She realized, with a kind of shock and joy, that it didn't matter if others noticed. What mattered was that she could see and honor herself at last. And then, her lifelong dream, always put aside for others, quietly took root. She set out on her first solo journey. Margaret's destination was Savannah, Georgia, a city she and Alan had visited decades before, when the boys were small. This time, she bought her own Amtrak ticket, reserved a room at a charming old bed and breakfast, and let herself splurge a little on a famous southern dinner: shrimp and grits, fried green tomatoes, a glass of sweet tea. Sitting at the table, Margaret smiled into the warmth. "When was the last time I tasted food this good? Just for me," she wondered, giggling quietly as she lifted another forkful to her lips. The next morning, she visited a little shop on River Street. She rented an elegant floral dress, had her hair done, and posed for a keepsake photograph with oak trees sweeping overhead. She thought, "I want to say congratulations to myself." To 70-year-old Margaret, who made it here on her own. That picture held a strength Margaret was only just beginning to believe in. A kind of courage for letting go of the past, and for stepping into whatever her new life might bring. When she returned home, Margaret printed out the photograph and placed it on her mantel. She took a fresh notebook from her bureau and wrote, plainly and boldly on the first page, "This is my restart diary. I won't live for someone else's expectations anymore. From now on, I'll laugh when I feel like it. I'll cry when I have to. For myself." Of course, sometimes memories came, her granddaughter's voice, the sweet faces of her sons as small boys, the laughter and bustle of the old kitchen table at holiday time. But Margaret never tried to scrub them away. Instead, she let them rest gently, tucked away in the album of her heart. She found that was enough. One day, at her club meeting, the leader posed a question. "What does happiness mean to you?" The group fell into a quiet, thoughtful hush. Margaret touched her chest, took a slow breath, and replied, "It's when you realize you don't have to keep holding it all in. You're allowed to stop pretending. And you don't have to keep sacrificing everything just to be loved." Her words glimmered in the sunlit room. Others nodded, some teary, some smiling. For the first time in years, Margaret felt the safe warmth of being among others who understood, of belonging to herself, finally and fully. At those simple, heartfelt words, someone in the group quietly began to cry. And in that moment, even Margaret herself felt her cheeks grow damp with the beginning of new tears. Just a little, just enough to be noticed. People, no matter how old we become, can always set out on a journey to come back to themselves. Margaret Young proved this truth with every soft, steady smile she wore. Just as she did again this morning, tucking her small purse under her arm, walking out her door, and heading toward a new adventure. The early sun spilled through the screened-in porch, gentle and golden across the old floorboards. Margaret, as usual, cupped her favorite pottery mug in both hands and sipped at the fresh tea she'd just brewed for herself. Outside in her tidy little yard, the hydrangeas had begun to blossom once more. their blue and pink heads nodding in the breeze. Each time the petals shimmered in the sunlight, it was as if the slow, turning wheel of the seasons whispered, "Life keeps moving, and we along with it. Thank you for blooming so beautifully again this year." Her voice was soft, fading into the hush, with a tenderness both motherly and as fresh as a young girl's happiness. Years back, right here on this porch, the echoes of her son's laughter used to fill the air. There were long, lazy summer evenings, too, sitting beside her late husband, Alan, glasses of iced tea growing warm on the porch rail as dusk settled over their quiet street. But now, time had carried most of those voices away. The house often stood silent, memories only echo. Still, Margaret was not alone. Not anymore. Now, in this gentle later season of her life, no longer living just to meet someone else's needs or expectations, Margaret had found enough space inside herself to really listen to her own heart's voice, at last. On the living room shelf sat an old, time-worn spiral notebook. Once upon a time, she'd tracked every grocery run, every utility bill, every holiday gift, a full 10 years of numbers written out in neat columns. That was Margaret's household ledger, the proof of her unspoken, ongoing care for her family. Page after page marked her silent generosity. Christmas plane tickets for Michael and David, meals out when everyone was home, birthday presents for her grandkids. Each dollar, each act of quiet giving kept, wordlessly, in those pages. But lately, the old notebook had taken on a different life. On its cover, in looping cursive, Margaret had written, "My thank you, Margaret, journal." Inside, the entries changed. Each day, she lovingly penned even the smallest victories and moments of gratitude, turning the focus back to herself. "Today I got up early and made breakfast. Just for me. Thank you, Margaret. Rode the train by myself down to the city for my community club. Good job, Margaret. The day I finally gathered my courage and said no at last. You did your best, Margaret." No one else ever saw these words. No one praised her for them. But Margaret, all the same, had begun to meet, maybe for the first time, the woman she truly was. "I haven't forgiven everything, not really, but I'm done with bitterness." One afternoon at her self-appreciation group, Margaret shared those words. Her face looked calm, proud, and alight with a gentle strength. "Forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's really something you do for yourself," she told them, looking steadily around the circle. The truth in her words settled softly over the group. Even those who listened nearby felt their hearts stir in the quiet. And now, to you, listening to this story, how does Margaret Young's decision make you feel? Because I'm their mother. Because that's just what families do. Because it's always been that way. Behind these familiar phrases, someone, maybe someone you love, could, in silence, be hurting. If, right now, you ever find yourself living for someone else's approval, until you can't even hear your own heart, I hope this story stays with you, even just a little. If, by chance, you realize, "I've never really thanked my mom for everything she's carried," why not pick up the phone today? One little call. It's never too late. Because truly, it is never, ever too late. And so, if you realize you've forgotten how to take care of yourself, how to truly value yourself, please, from tomorrow on, try just one simple thing each day. Say thank you to yourself. Even if it feels small or a little awkward at first, give yourself that kindness. Whisper it in the mirror, jot it in a notebook, or just hold it quietly in your heart. Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, Carla, whoever you are. It matters. If this story resonated with you, if it reached something gentle and true inside your own heart, I'd be so grateful if you'd consider leaving a little like or subscribing to this channel. Your support means more than you know. It's what lets stories like Margaret's find their way to others who might need a moment of peace, of reminder, or of hope. Going forward, I'll keep sharing stories just like this, stories that celebrate the depth and kindness of everyday lives, the quiet courage it takes to put yourself back at the center of your own story, and the gentle acts that heal even the longest held wounds. I want these stories to reach you, to sit with you, and perhaps to lighten your days. Thank you, truly, for listening. Thank you for opening your heart to Margaret's journey. And, above all, for believing that it's never too late to choose yourself. Forgive what's past, and care gently for who you are right now. With all my gratitude for your time and your company, please take care.